also need to see if anyone is here. Nadia, can you see everybody?
I see 5 attendees and then the 6 of us as panelists.
Okay, so now our attendees can see us and can hear us.
Oh, that's nice. And they can also post things in the chat, right?
They can, yeah. So they can say hello to us if they wish to.
All day long.
Yeah. Thank you, Eliza.
Eliza. All day long when my kid is in Zoom school, all I hear is someone saying, I'll drop a link in the chat. Well,
I think we'll be doing a lot of that today.
hey, Izzy.
Mm-hmm.
And at what point do you want to be introduced and so on, Alex? Do you want us to wait till like 7:05?
Yeah, let's give it 3 more minutes.
Why don't you and Yvette tell us why you started Strange Light?
Alex, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, thanks, Yvette. I think we started Strange Light because it was really exciting. The Book Moon had opened and it felt like speculative fiction had a home in the Valley in a way that maybe it didn't have before, even though there are so many speculative fiction writers around here. So I think like a lot of the vision was that it was going to happen face to face, right? So it's like, yeah, we're going to do an event in a bookstore and we're going to bring people together and we're going to build community. And then we organized our first event and then we had to cancel it pretty much this time last year, I think. March 10th, maybe I sent the email to Cadwell and Julie that because of the pandemic, it wasn't going to happen. And so we moved into Zoom, which has been a learning curve, but has also been really great. I've loved the conversations that have come up from the Q&A. And there's still been a really big community vibe, I feel, when we've been doing these things. Yvette, why did you say yes?
Yeah, so when Alex told me about the idea, I was like super excited about it. Since like we're both in the MFA program. So like a lot of like the readings are more literary fiction focused. So to have like a speculative fiction space was pretty cool. And also like the focus on like BIPOC writers was also like pretty important.
Yeah. So thank you, Book Moon, for being hosts to this as well.
I'm so glad you want to do it. I missed KGB from being in New York. Although, again, with the Zoom thing, I have actually watched some KGB readings.
Interesting.
Sometimes I put them on at work. It's quite nice.
All right, well, if you want to start us off.
All right. Right. Hello, everybody who is here. My name is Gavin Grant, and I keep thinking I should be at Book Moon when I'm doing this, but I never am. So here we are in Book Moon virtual space once again, welcoming back the Strange Light reading series. Very happy. Of all the things that have to come back from 2020, this is one of the things I'm most happy about. So thank you for that. So my name is Gavin Grant. I'm the manager. I'm going to introduce the people who are going to do who run the series. First of all, do a very short land acknowledgement. This event, the US, the East Hampton and Northampton part of it takes place on lands traditionally owned by the Pocumtuck people, and we wish to acknowledge them as the traditional owners. We'd also like to pay our respects to the elders past and present and native elders of communities who may be here today. And today I'm very happy to pass this over once again to Alexander Manglis, Yvette Nedolovu, and they have brought on a new person as well for the Strange Light reading series, Nadia Saleh. So thank you, everybody. Thank you for doing this.
Thanks, Gavin. Welcome to the third event of Strange Light Reading Series. Really excited to have you here. It's great to see returning people coming back to this reading series. Just wanted to say again, thanks to Book Moon for hosting this, and please support your indie bookstores. One of my favorite things that they are selling right now is the t-shirt, and I've dropped the link in the chat. And if you could follow, we'll be throwing up links to all the books that will be mentioned by our readers today, and you can buy them through Book Moon, so you can support both our authors and our indie bookstores. So thank you for being here. And yep, there are 2 books already to see. Gavin is showing us. And I'll leave it to Yvette. I will slowly start to phase my video out to introduce our readers today. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm really excited to introduce our amazing 2 readers today. Today we have C.L. Polk, they, them, who is the author of the World Fantasy Award-winning novel Witchmark, the first novel of the Kingstone cycle. Their novel, The Midnight Bargain, was the finalist in the CBC Canada Reads competition, and they have just released the 3rd volume of the cycle, Soul Star. After leaving high school early, they have worked as a film extra, sold vegetables on the street, and identified exotic insect species for a vast collection of Lepidoptera before settling down to write fantasy novels. Mix Pauls lives near the Bow River in Calgary, Alberta, in a tiny apartment with too many books and a yarn stash that could last a decade. They ride a Grin bicycle with a basket on the front. They drink good coffee because life is too short. They spend too much time on Twitter. And we have Alaya Dawn Johnson, who is the author of Reconstruction, Stories and 7 novels for adults and young adults. Her most recent novel for adults is Trouble the Saints, a young adult novel. The Summer Prince was longlisted for the National Book Award, and Love is the Drug won the Norton Award. Her short stories have appeared in many magazines and anthologies, including Best American Science Fiction and Fantasy. She lives in Mexico, where she received a master's degree with honors in Mesoamerican Studies at the Universidad Nacional Autónoma de Mexico for her thesis on pre-Columbian fermented food and its role in the religious agricultural calendar. So a virtual round of applause for our readers, and we'll start off with Chelsea reading for us.
Didn't know it was muted. All right, so I decided I wanted to read from Soul Star today. I'm sorry if you were looking for The Midnight Bargain, but I'm capricious, and I apologize in advance for my overly dramatic reading. Chapter 1, A Favor for Favor. The knock came an hour after we had put up the storm boards and battened down to wait it out. Everyone in the second parlor looked in its direction, as if we could see who it was, bracing themselves against the wind that scoured the street. Aunt Glory dropped her knitting on her lap to wave her burl-knuckled hand at me. "Robin, go see who it is." "I will," Amos shouted, and he left the parlor, quick as counting, pelting down the hall. I set down my notebook and bones of the body to follow little Amos, leaving my seat near the rear fire to step into the foyer. Joy followed, melting through the wall as spirits do, following her nephew down the hall. Only trouble would come to Clan Thorpe on the teeth of a cyclonic blizzard, no other reason for it. The door lever was icy to the touch, and I pushed against the door to keep it from slamming into my face. Trouble indeed. Grace Hensley had come to my door, holding a dome of still air while the Storm Bull's gift howled up the street. Trouble. Worse than trouble, and Grace had brought it to me without a moment's pause. Amos wormed in front of me and craned his neck, pointing at Grace. "Ahoy! I remember you." "Ahoy," Grace replied. "You should go inside. It's very cold out." I put my hand on Amos's head and steered him back inside. "Why are you here, of all places? There's a storm on the way." "That's exactly why." Grace Hensley said. I have news. I couldn't shut the door in her face, not with the snow swirling in the street. But even if I still mistrusted Grace Hensley, I couldn't deny her hospitality. Hurry inside, I said. Put your skis anywhere they will fit on the rack. Amos had already scampered back to the second parlor to tell the elders who had come to Clanthorpe in such terrible weather. Grace shed her wet boots and found slippers in the seagrass woven basket. Grace stood up, and I fought a flash of irritation as she flexed her knees to half crouch to match my height. But then she spoke in my ear, her voice low. Constantina abdicated. Severin's first act as king was to abolish the Witchcraft Protection Act. Is there somewhere we can talk? Not just prorogued. 100 responses trampled each other for the chance to be first. Why would he do that? Grace's shoulders came up as she winced her way through a smile. That's the reason why I'm here, but can we... You want something. I do. But consider this. I ought to be with the storm singers right now. I'm not. It's that important. I could at least hear her out. She was here for the duration, as there was no turning her out in that wind. Back parlor, I said. But first we run the gauntlet. The Witchcraft Protection Act was no more. What I had fought for these past 20 years, the fight I thought I would pass on to the next generation of my clan, was done. Too late to free those I loved, but our struggle was over. Why did King Severin strike down the law? The Amaranthines wanted it. I thought the Amaranthines wouldn't get involved in our politics. Grace sighed. I bullied him into it. I don't know if I'll be able to pull it off again. What's the gauntlet? Robin? Eldest called. Who's at the door? I led the way to the second parlor, where 4 generations of Thorpes gathered next to hearth fires and watched curiously. The children seated on chairs and stools knitted and sewed, while the younger children sprawled on the floor to play slap with 4 decks of playing cards. Eldest spotted Grace and grinned. You couldn't stay away, he said, wagging one finger playfully. No one forgets our fish fry. I've had dreams about it, Grace said. Eldest leaned forward in his seat, still smiling. And what brings you here, Chancellor? I wanted to speak with Miss Thorpe. In this weather? Bernice turned her head to gaze at the snow flying on the other side of the window. It must be important. Grace nodded. It is. We should go, I said. Come with me. Not so fast, Aunt Gloria said. I want to know what brought you here when the storm of a lifetime is at our doorstep, and by rights you should be up on your hill with your royal knights trying to turn it back. Grace's jaw dropped. We didn't hide a thing from you, did we? You did not, Gloria said, strutting all over town with your auras blazing. Imagine no one knew your secret. We knew. We had to know if we were going to survive you. Aunt Glory, I said, I don't think Grace has time to go over all this. Stay where you are. Aunt Bernice pointed at Grace. There's only one reason why she's here at a time like this. She knows about our circle. She's here to press them into service. We have to unite our power, Grace said. It's our only chance. Mm-hmm, Gloria said. And then you'll round them all up. She had the Witchcraft Act abolished, I said. Gasps arose from everyone in the parlor. Is that true? Eldest asked. Miss Grace, you said you couldn't. Constantina abdicated, Grace said. Severin is now king. His first act was to repeal the law because you convinced him, I supplied, since she wouldn't tell the others. Modesty. I didn't expect it from her. It was the right thing to do, Grace said. Every witch in Eland is free and safe from persecution, and I did it just in time because I need your people to help us fight this cyclone. Oh, I knew it. She did want something, and she had changed history by abolishing the Witchcraft Act to get it. Not just suspended an illegal oubliette of a prorogue, but erased from the books. I waited for the dream to switch, for someone to turn into a beast or a tree or a monster, so that this would all make sense. I wasn't dreaming. I knew I wasn't, but it still didn't feel real. Did you bring a copy of the writ? Grace's shoulders slouched. There wasn't time. But Jacob Clark had to have heard by now. I half expected that the news had already spread. Everything's under storm alert, I said. Parliament didn't meet today. I swear to you, it's true, Grace said. She slipped a white-handled witch knife from her pocket. I will swear my blood before the entire clan. Please, I need you to believe me. You should have brought Miles with you, I said. Everyone would believe Miles. I couldn't bring Miles. He's still not well enough. Tristan was in no shape either. Grace was no fool. Ignorant where it benefited her to be ignorant, accustomed to being treated as a figure of authority and respect. She knew that I could convince the others to believe her if she convinced me herself. But I had seen the faces of neighbors who'd worked as navigators aboard our sailing vessels, pinched with worry and glancing to the west, bringing firewood and stove oil to clans who might need it. We know it's bad. I startled when the storm birds rumbled so loudly it was like being inside a drum. But if you're here, it's worse than we thought. Worse than this? Aunt Gloria asked. A distant crack of thunder, nearly buried in the force of the wind, made us all look west. This is the edge of it. Grace was prepared to swear on her blood, but I still kept my silence, standing in the midst of my clan. Could I trust her word? Could I afford to doubt it? Please, Miss Thorpe, Grace said. It's the best chance Elin has to survive, and Elin will demonstrate its gratitude for your witches. I will see to it. She had the power, and a king who seemed sympathetic to the needs of his nation's citizens. She could pull a great many strings. And she would. I was just stalling. It was time to bargain. What do you plan to do once this storm is put down? So many things, I don't have time to list them all, Grace said. With Severin's rise to the throne, we have an incredible opportunity to build something better. But to do that, I need you. I took half a step back. Me. I don't truly understand the extent of the corruption in the system. I can't know. Up until recently, I didn't even know there was a real problem. I dismissed you all as complainers. I let an exasperated sigh escape my lips. And why wouldn't you? From where you sat, everything was fine. I was wrong, Grace said. How easily she admitted mistakes, ignorance, vulnerability. Her candor disarmed me, her honesty meeting the walls of my suspicion and gently melting them away. Glory sat up straight, her posture all icy dignity. And now you need our Robin. For what? Aunt Glory, how do you know she isn't in trouble? Gloria answered. How do you know what her promises are worth? Ma'am, Grace said, you have an excellent point. I'm not trustworthy, not yet, but I'm trying to be. You all know exactly what's wrong with Eland. Robin knows what the people want, which is why I want her. She turned back to me, which is why I want you to come work for me. The parlor murmured. I put up my hand, forestalling comment. You want me to work for you? I need your vision. I want to give you access. Do you want to talk to the king? I can make that happen. Do you want to write new laws? We can do that. It's perfect. You can start right away. The salary is 12,000 marks a year. 1,000 marks a month. That's what I could expect to make as a surgeon, and she was lowballing me. She did want me, but she couldn't know what she was offering. Chancellor Hensley, I said, setting my hands on her hips. Do you know what my vision is? Do you know what the Solidarity Collective wants? She blinked, her face blank with thought. Uzadalian democracy. You want Eland to be like the countries in the League of Uzadal. The word Uza meant something that didn't quite translate to Elander. It meant solidarity. It meant unity. But something more than that. It meant that the people banded together in a community had a moral duty to each other, to serve one another. We want more than just a resemblance to Isidalian ideals. I gestured to include the clan in this room, but the circle went wider than that. We want Elin to join the League. Grace stepped back, pushing herself away from my words. Isidalian countries don't have ruling monarchs. They do not. They support the common vote. They do. Is that job offer still on the table? Grace's face lined itself as she thought. A gust of wind bashed itself against the window, and Grace turned her face westward, intent on whatever she sensed out there. She went pale. There's no more time, and I need you on my team, even if you do want to upend all order and tradition. So yes, the offer stands, only please, we need to go now. How do you think we're going to make it to the hall? I asked. That wind is... I can shelter us with my power, Grace said. It'll deplete me, but we must. Aunt Gloria sighed. You can't. They're pretty words, Robin, maybe even true ones, but they're not enough to risk exposing the circle. She couldn't be lying. Not about the law, and not about the danger. If I didn't take her, would we survive? We need her, I said. We can't risk letting this storm howl across England. I have to take her. Robin, Gloria said, are you certain? I'd get into deep trouble with the circle for this. They'd censure me, distrust me, maybe even shun me. But this was the only choice. Yes, I said. I will face the cost of doing this. We have a storm to put down. I think I should probably stop there, even though it's a little bit early.
That was such a treat. Thank you. And everyone, feel free to put in your questions in the Q&A as they arise. And now we'll hear from Alaya.
Okay, awesome. That was super exciting, Chelsea. Definitely want to know what happens next. Okay, so I'm going to read from the title story of my collection, Reconstruction, out this past January from Small Beer Press. And I'm going to read like from a bit in the middle. Actually, it looks like it's kind of getting dark here. Sorry, I'm going to turn the light on. Okay, yeah. So basically what you have to know is Sally, the main character, is a cook for the 1st South Carolina Regiment. She's technically a company laundress, sometimes cook for the 1st South Carolina Regiment during the Civil War. And one of her closest friends is Flip, a gunner who was captured by the Rebs about 9 months before this scene starts. I fell down in a praise meeting after the rout at Fort Gregg. We were stationed on Coal Island that fall of '64, and I felt my own life's flame as a cold and lonely pricking in the dark. Bo Whitaker was even more improbably alive, and it was his steady warmth, more than any doctor's treatment, that kept me above the earth in that time. That evening we were singing, "Where, oh, where are the Hebrew children," in honor of Billy Brown, who had just been planted, as the boys would say, in the mud of the levee behind them. I tossed stinging jokes around with the boys that at least now Jesus could keep him away from those Jezebels, and one threw back, "Oh, knowing Billy, he's negotiating a few for himself right now." My laughter was a giddy, bitter thing, which I hid behind another joking observation that he would be spared the affront of the drummer boys riding Piggy into meetings. One replied that her pigship would meet him soon enough in heaven. "Clarence must miss her," young Moses said so solemnly that our laughter died like dried mud. Our last drummer boy had been rolled by swamp fever 3 months before. How do you bear that which cannot be borne? It could have been Flip whispering to me again in my delirium. That is the question asked by the slave as her eye catches the steady light of the North Star, of the mother who has lost her child, and of the child roughly stripped of her mother's embrace. Where, oh, where are the Hebrew children? Away, over in the promised land. Someone moaned, "Lord, take me there. Surely by now we have earned our reward." I rolled my eyes heavenward, but instead of the star-whorled sky, I saw our boys, red breeches stark as a cardinal's crest against the charcoal of a recently burned field. There were so many dead, I could not count them. Water lapped against the causeway, and above us, turkey vultures swung in slow descending spirals. It was Bo Whitaker who woke me. My hair was wet and my eyes stung. I squinted up at him and the milling faces above. "Sally, what happened?" "The spirit touched you." I had spoken in tongues, they told me. I had an aunt who was always touched by the spirit during praise meetings, but I had never been one for the holy shakes. Bo Whitaker took me back to our tent and held me while he cried. I was coughing again. You promised to marry me, Sally. If we win. My voice was hoarse and without conviction. He wiped his eyes and gave me a tired smile like he had once given me a crown of Spanish moss. If not, we'll jump the broom in the promised land, he said, with Clarence and Flip and Piggy as witnesses. I slept to that lullaby and did not remember until morning that Piggy had not yet gone on ahead, and I still lit a flame with Flip's name on it in some nights after Bo Whitaker had gone to sleep and prayed to the spirits to light his way home. I worried at my vision like a sore tooth. I could not make sense of the burned field, the wide causeway, the salty tang of marshland in that cold dawn air. What battle had that been? Fort Wagner with the bodies, but I knew the lay of that battle very well and could not place my vision among those fields where saw palms cradled the vulture-cleaned bones. I told Bo of my worry as I scrubbed the long johns of a few dozen soldiers. I had to pause for breath in my telling of it, but he just helped me move a pair to the ringer and planted a soft kiss in the nap at the back of my head. That's just war, Sally. Folks die in the fields and the crows come for them. There's nothing easier to predict. But what if something's coming, Bo? A big one, like Fort Wagner. He whistled lightly through the gap between his front teeth. They all a big one if it's your turn to go on ahead. Flip didn't even see Fort Wagner. I nodded like a scarecrow in a breeze. A deep breath of carbolic and Bo Whitaker was not enough to stop it. Ambulance wagons rolling onto the field, the squelch and pop of those great wheels rolling over the dead, the sweet green smell of plantation fields after a rain mixing with the sour aftertaste of blood. They called me their mother, their woman, the one still alive who would die soon enough. Bo took me by the shoulders and held on. Finish your washing. General Saxton came in to see Colonel Trowbridge this morning. I think they're fixing to send us out again. Sherman. They're still not sure where he is. Those rebel pickets up by Port Royal Ferry, my guess. We'd been trading bullets like jokes with the Rebs up north on Port Royal Island ever since I enlisted as company laundress. Now? Bo's laugh was a bleak, fleshless thing. Johnny Reb's still there, ain't he? The news washed through camp like a summer rain, and the boys made a show of it. Young Moses wove a bonnet of dune grass for her pig ship and paraded her through camp that evening. I made myself smile and then felt a tiny release, a soap bubble burst of joy. Piggy was still alive, and so was Bo, and so was I. Zolly's bones littered the fields of Fort Wagner, but Guillaume was still with us. He played bullfighter to Piggy's snuffling entreaties for the dried shrimp she could smell in his pockets. The boys laughed as tears streamed from their eyes. The next morning, the sun shone, the yellow of clabbered milk, upon the rows of long johns and undershirts hanging blessedly clean upon the line. I met Guillaume as he was climbing out of the channel from the Stono River, a striped bass the size of my forearm speared on a stick topped with an old Indian arrowhead. He struck a pose when he saw me, his beard beaded with water and his naked torso streaming. He looked like a painting in one of Mr. Wentworth's books, the ones I would read in his study when granted house duty. An old white man with a trident and a sea-tangled beard. But this vision was no white man's God. Here was Mother Watersun, guardian of the deep, black and free. The colonel has you boys running drills today, Guillaume, I told him. He squinted past my shoulder to the even rows of the company tents and planted the butt end of his spear into the ground. The sea bass trembled. The colonel can get himself planted, Miss Sally. The force of his diction rocked me back like a hot wind. Colonel Trowbridge has been very good to us. He spat. He's one just like the others, the ones that got Zolly killed. Like I said, they can all get planted. Johnny Reb and Billy Yank. They can just leave us be. Guillaume, I said carefully, those are dangerous words in wartime. He pointed to my rucksack and basket. Ain't those conjuring herbs, Miss Sally? If you'd go talking to the dead, be sure to tell Zolly that I won't be telling Zolly anything, Guillaume. His eyes lingered on me, empty as a pine box. They'll pay, the ones that did this to us. You can't revenge yourself upon the whole Union Army. But at that, he just laughed and took the path back to camp, whistling. I watched him, unsettled, until he passed out of sight. I tried to put Guillaume's request from my mind. I knew that thirst for vengeance, and I did not agree with Flip on this point after all. Righteous or not, all vengeance wore poison fruit. I took the little skiff we kept on the west side of Coal Island across the creek and made the half-hour trek to the cypress forest on Snake Island. Bo Whitaker would be drilling with the boys for most of the day. and a soft hand had touched me in the night, bringing with it the smell of speaking herbs. It was a relief, at last, to know what to do. Dandelion greens, edges ridged like the inside fold of Bo Whitaker's ear, which I would touch while he slept. A beautiful clutch of chicory roots that would serve for coffee in the morning, the greens still fresh enough for the pot. Peppergrass and red clover and shepherd's purse, each heart-shaped fold of its leaves the size of my first baby's fingernails. There are herbs for the dying, that's root working, and herbs for the dead, that's conjuring. A bit of flame, a bit of smoke, and a few thumbs of moonshine whiskey to wet the haunted earth. I had no use for gopher dust here. The story went that some 30 years ago, a contraband slaver was spotted by a federal sloop a few miles out from the Charleston harbor and so ran up the Stono River for cover. The Federals caught their trail, though, and the slaver captain realized they would soon be discovered. To hide the evidence of his crime, he pushed all the Africans on board into the deepest part of the river, their hands and feet bound and weighted with wooden yokes and steel chains. The locals had it, you could still hear the old Africans groaning, rattling their chains and cursing that old slave captain in their mother tongues. The mud of this place would be all the grave dirt I needed. Then my herbs, John the Conqueror, five-finger grass, camphor, and a pinch of sage so old the wide, gray-green leaves had crumbled to a powder the color of ashes. My fingers trembled as I sprinkled this over the rest. It had come from far away, from a place I had sworn I would never see again, but that I would miss as a wounded soldier misses a limb. With my cooking knife, I cut my left index finger and let the blood fall onto the conjuring. I waited. The sun was tangled in the branches of the cypress to my right, casting an 11 o'clock shadow over the conjure bowl and the gray muslin of my skirts. The leaves jumped and shook, clamored in the clean breeze that hummed of salt sea and steel ships, danced their way between my ragged hemline and the tarnished silver of my bowl. Just a little longer now. I had brought that bowl with me when we took off from Mr. Wentworth's plantation. I figured I was stealing myself, so I might as well steal a little something else besides. I had always liked that bowl. It had held the soup I gave Mr. Wentworth's son the night my first baby was born. I never gave that baby a name. Martinique sent me back to quarters from the kitchens and told me to take care of it before dinner. The baby came out with no one to catch her. Grandma had bought her freedom the year before. She died in the time it took me to reach for the bloody straw where she lay limp and twisted. She was red, but I knew she would have been light if she lived. She had my nose and great-grandma's mouth. I buried her in the herb garden with that bloody straw for a shroud, beneath the sage and the sorrel. I washed myself in the trough and pinned back my hair and made it back to the big house in time to serve Mr. Wentworth and his son back from school for the first time in 6 months. I laced his soup with a generous dose of mayapple tincture that Martinique handed me without a single shared word or glance, just our fingers, passing rebellion. He spent that whole visit purging himself fit to die. I cleaned his chamber pot and slept on the truckle bed beneath his, and not once did he importune me. I considered killing the boy. It would have been easy to do, and in his state, no one would have suspected me. I passed nights sweating with desire, sweating that poison out of me. The boy lived. Above my girl's head flowered a riot of sage, sorrel flower, knobby bushes of peppermint that no winter could kill. The shadows slid neatly over themselves and left me alone among the trees. I dug up a handful of dirt, black as pitch and blue. O spirits, O great grandmother who resides in heaven with our Lord and Savior, I am weary and sore of heart. O mama, I am willow twisted and cracked in the roil and storm of this war. The nearer we are to freedom, the farther from peace. Justice smells of life everlasting and copper coins, and her voice is not a song or a prayer, but a cry. Remember, the spirits blow back. I heard her in the breeze, the mouthy leaves, a sudden gust of whiskey and pipe tobacco. What do you ask of the dead, my daughter? My great-grandmother had been a great conjure woman in her day. It was said she could fly, but she would always return to the plantation for her babies and her babies' babies, and eventually me. I was afraid of her, of my audacity in asking, but I was possessed of such bravery that is the bitter reward of despair. Keep my boys here, I cried to the trees, flaunting their drapery of Spanish moss. Let them stay at least a little while longer, a few more weeks, just a few more weeks. A perfect stillness settled over the noontime. My labored breath was the only air that moved in that place. I did not see her, but I remembered her more sharply than any painting. The dark of her skin, the bone whites of her eyes, her lips, which never frowned and rarely smiled. I have heard you, my daughter. I will do as you ask. Will you bear it? I tasted the pact as copper on my tongue. I will. An autumn rain, brief as a peal of laughter, blessed my conjuring. I lay upon the earth, pouring whiskey down my throat as black water leached through my petticoats. I thought of my daughter, whom I never knew, of the earth where she and my great-grandmother rested, of my boys in the 54th Massachusetts and 1st South Carolina, those who had been planted and those who still lived to face shell fire. I heard the man approach before I saw his face. He moved as one with no fear of these woods of Johnny Reb or old African ghosts. But this was no white man. I knew that too by his weary footfalls on this land that had never been, but might one day be his. I turned my tear-streaked face south and waited. The man limped and an old straw hat covered his face with shadow, but I could no more mistake the weary grace of his approach than I could forget the poetry of his voice. He wore mere rags on his feet, a pair of rebel breeches and a slave's homespun shirt. I sat up and my head spun. He removed his hat. I heard you, Sally. I followed your voice as a beacon, as the shepherds followed a light to God. Flip took in the conjure bowl, the nearly empty bottle of whiskey, the knife. He held out his hand. Let's leave this place, Sally. It smells of blood. Thank you.
Wow. Those were two just amazing readings. Thank you so much, both of you. So different and both of them so filled with different energies and power. Yeah, give a round of virtual applause in the chat if you can. It's the one bad thing about the Zoom and the webinar is that you can't hear your audience anymore. But if everyone's feeling the way that I am, it's just overwhelmed. So thank you both. These were so different, these readings that you did, and it's really making me think a lot about just sort of how different the writings that you do, even in your own oeuvres, are can come up against one another in separate ways. I'm just thinking about like how Chelsea has a novelette coming out with fantasy and science fiction this month, right? That I think is very different to kind of what you just read from, and Alaya, you also write YA, and I think it's very different to kind of the short story that you just read now. And I was wondering if you could both speak to what it feels like to come into those voices differently, and to how it feels to approach those different types of, I don't even want to call them genres, but forms in your own writing practice.
I kind of think about character voice as the only way the person reading the book is going to get to know this character in like their point of view. Like I spend a lot of time thinking about where the character came from. Where did they go to school? Did they like to read? Do they have a big vocabulary? Are they very formal in their tone? Are they not very formal in their tone? Can they code switch depending on the situation? There's a lot of things that I think about. It's not like I sit down and I like fill out a worksheet or anything. I just kind of think. I wash the dishes and I think about what it's like to have the character talking in my head and what things they say that kind of betray the beliefs underneath their words. And then when I go to write it, I just kind of write it. And then I have a very technical trick that I use. when I need to dramatically switch tone, when I was writing the music of the Sephirophanies, I needed to switch tone because I was writing this very formal, like very high toned kind of voice when I was writing the Midnight Bargain, and I needed a palate cleanser. So I wrote the first draft of that story in first person perspective, and Reese swore like a trucker, like it was everywhere. And then I went in and I vacuumed all of the obscenity out, and then I put it back in where it seemed like it was appropriate. But that was something that I did deliberately to kind of jar me out of the habit of writing in a certain way. So it's part imagination and part like deliberate exercise for me.
Yeah, wow, I love that technique. I'm gonna maybe try to steal that a little because that sounds. I can definitely fall into, especially if I'm. Well, kind of, it kind of doesn't matter if it's more formal or less formal, but like if I've written like a whole novel in a certain voice, like then kind of everything I write for a while starts to sound like that, unless I try to really consciously deviate. I do like experimenting with voices and styles. It's just something that I endlessly do. It's like if you look at the collection, I mean, it runs the gamut. It's like third person and first person. There's actually one short story that is just a compilation of like excerpts and articles and like message board comments and stuff like that. And so every one of those was just me trying to figure out like what that voice would sound like. And, like a libertarian weblog circa 2013 and stuff like that, so it's a really like wild voice experiment. So I mean, that kind of stuff has always been really intriguing to me. I feel like actually kind of more recently I've sort of veered away from like kind of more obvious extreme experimentation to try to get into more like very deep character studies. Like the last two stories, like the two new stories in that collection, Reconstruction and another one called The Mirages, are like very deep character studies. And so for that, it's and one of them is third person, kind of more distant, and the other one, and this one that I just read, is obviously first person, pretty close in. And so like, it's true, the character absolutely, especially in first person, dictates so much of the voice I'm using, but it's also kind of like what effect I'm going for as the writer. So sometimes, like in The Mirages, like the voice, it's a little distant from that character, and that's very deliberate because that character is an unreliable narrator in the end. So spoiler, I guess not really spoiler, whatever. So like, yeah, and I guess I don't know. I mean, in terms of YA, I don't know if like the process is all that different. Really, if anything, I love using YA as a kind of very like wonderful experimental playground, because I feel like YA readers are so open to that kind of experimentation and are such adventurous readers, are not kind of quite as locked into genre expectations in some ways. And so I love taking advantage of that and being able to kind of like just like let my imagination run wild on the page, and that also comes into voice and how I play with that.
The next question is from Vida James, and I think this is like pretty relevant to the pandemic and the times that we're living in. So the question is, when you're feeling stuck creatively, where do you find inspiration? How do you push yourselves creatively when in difficult times?
I can go first. I don't always, I mean, honestly, sometimes difficult times is like the best thing you can do for yourself is just say, hey, this is hard. Like I don't have to write, my 2,000 words a day or whatever in the middle of a pandemic. Like that's just a good way of burning yourself out. So I've been trying to be understanding of myself. I say this because I love saying this because I feel like, yes, that's so true, but like I don't follow this rule at all. Sometimes I'm so bad. I just like so angry with myself all the time. Like I should be working harder, but honestly, it's just there's not a lot you can do sometimes. And I think trying to relax and also just like letting the well fill. I mean, if you've really just been churning out a lot of work, this is sometimes you need to give yourself time to let like your creative process kind of like fill up again, however that works for you. But I think often just sometimes time and what we call self-care, but like not necessarily or just like kind of physical stuff, like just giving yourself some time, some like love, reading books that you like and maybe kind of experimenting a little with different things sometimes can kind of get you out of a rut, but not like in a kind of punitive way either, just like a more childlike spirit of exploration. Those are the kinds of things I'm attempting to do. Of course, I moved to the Mexican countryside, so I also have this thing where everything is totally new. And guys are listening to like these turkeys fighting outside of my window. So that is also kind of very inspiring, but it also means that I'm frankly like not writing that much, you know? I mean, I feel like the inspiration is happening back here. And so who knows when the actual like typing things out inspiration is going to happen. I just trying to let myself go with the flow.
When I'm feeling stuck creatively, I mean, this depends on the situation. Am I in the middle of drafting a story? Because if I'm stuck, oh boy. Because of the way that I draft stories, I start at where I'm pretty sure the beginning of the story starts, and then I dutifully march linearly all the way through the end. So if I get to the point where I'm stuck in a scene, this is what happens. I say, I'm really frustrated. I'm stuck in a scene, swear word. And somebody will say, well, do you know what happens after the scene? It's like, yeah, I totally know what happens after the scene. It's really bitching. And they're like, just write that. I'm like, no. It's like, what? No. I cannot do it. I must write it in order. I have to. So if I'm stuck, I'm screwed until I get unstuck. And it's perverse. The more I think about how stuck I am, the more stuck I get. So I have to like basically like ignore it. I have to like shut down all of the stuff that I use, all of my resources for the book. I got to tuck them away in a corner. I back them up on my various virtual cloud services. And then I don't work on writing. I am not a writer for a week. I'm watching Grey's Anatomy. Nothing else is happening. Goodbye. And I just wait. I wait until I figure it out. I have to take all of the pressure off, or I will sit there for months, basically giving myself anxiety for no good reason at all. The other situation is when I'm feeling stuck creatively in that I am in between projects and I don't know what my next project is going to be. Like I don't have anything in the hopper that is waiting. Well, if I'm out of ideas or if the back ideas I have don't seem interesting to me, that means the well's empty. And this is not something that Grey's Anatomy can cure. This is where I have to seek out nonfiction most often. Like I can read other people's books and I can be like, oh, I really love this characterization. I love this language. I love this and I love that and I love that, but it doesn't fill the will. It entertains me and it helps me observe things about writing. But if I need to fill the well, then that means that I need to read about the history of residential burglary. It means that I need to read about the transformation from alchemy to modern chemistry. It means that I need to read about political structures in ancient South America. And there's no rhyme or reason to it. It's just I have to follow my curiosity wherever it leads. It might be a dead end. It might be that I have read about the folk fashions of Macedonia and I can't actually use it, but it doesn't matter. What matters is that everything that I read gives me a seed of curiosity for the next thing that I read. So it looks like I'm kind of like bouncing around like a pinball on a pinball machine, but everything is connected to everything else. And then sooner or later, I'm going to hit something and everything that I've read is just going to mash together into this glorious collision and I will have an idea. And then I can actually work. But that's like basically those are the two situations.
That both of your responses are resonate a lot with me. And Chelsea, I had exactly that same problem with a scene, and someone told me, "Can you just write the next one?" I was like, "No,
you can't."
No.
Yeah, I can't either. Like, no.
That's not how this works.
The story has an order.
Yes, and you must follow it. When you're creating, there does not need to be order, but when you're writing, there must be order.
Gavin does actually want to know more about the history of residential burglary, but maybe we can hold off on that for a while. And thank you both for those answers. I think that everyone's looking for the answer to how do you fill the well right now. So the next question comes from Catherine Sinkowski, who says, it's such a treat to hear and see both of you reading your own words live. I wonder what that experience feels like to you, and if it's strange, enlightening, almost like hearing yourself in a recording, but then something more or something deeper.
Honestly, when I'm reading something out loud and it's published and it's in its static form and there's nothing I can do about it, I just want to put on my superhero suit and fly to every residence in the country that has my book, steal them, fix them, and put them back. Because I'm always finding prose and I'm like, oh, did I really write that? And then not notice? Oh no. And so reading is very kind of nerve-wracking for me because it's just basically like it's somebody who remembers every single thing I did wrong 4 years ago and has come back to smack me with it.
Yeah, I know that feeling. I'm it's a problem. I try to just like really distance myself from my text. Like as far as I'm concerned, someone else wrote them. I mean, I really try. As soon as it's in galley stage, I'm like, what book? This kind of has another bad side to it, which is that I literally sometimes like forget my own books. I did the other day, or like last summer or something. I think I went back and I read like my second novel, and I remember at readings for that, like having that kind of like visceral, like, oh God, this prose, I must fix it all. But at 10 years removed, I was like, wow, this is kind of good. Like it just sort of seemed like somebody else's book. And so I felt like all this kind of like magnanimous forgiveness of the errors of my past self because she was just so young. And so I was like, I just like quite enjoyed myself. So now I really don't know what to make of that. Like, I don't know, but I also find it like impossible. I mean, truly impossible to listen to my audiobooks. I'm so sorry. This is nothing against you audiobook readers. You're lovely, but like, I just can't do it. I think it's probably because I have in my own head, like a very strict notion of like the rhythm of the prose. And I understand that people are going to read it the way they're going to read it. But when I listen to somebody else, giving it their own interpretation, I'm like constantly desperately trying to like make them change it. So it's like not useful. And so I just don't. So sometimes maybe I even like reading it out loud because I'm like, at least these 3 people will hear the way it should sound.
I kind of like I've only listened to one of my audiobooks start to finish. The rest of them that I've listened to and I'm like, okay, this sounds really beautiful. I really like the cadence. I like the way they're handling the text. I have to leave because I have to fix it. So I have to go. But for Soulstar, the narrator is Robin Miles, and she is amazing. She's my favorite audiobook narrator in the entire world. And I started listening to it and I got sucked in. I got sucked in by my own book. How does that happen?
I feel like I love that. I need maybe like more distance or something, because listening to people read my recent fiction, I'm like, oh God, there's fingernails on it. Like, I can't, like all of me just wants to hide under a desk. Like, I don't know what that's about.
Okay, so our next question comes from Izzy Wasserstein. In the midst of the extremely difficult year, understatement of the year, I'd love to know where you're finding joy or what sustains you.
It's been a very hard year. It's been also a year where I've like just made these like I mean, what I had thought my life was going to look like is obviously extremely different from what it looked like. But perhaps to like a really extreme degree, because I like just moved to the countryside to my partner's town. And so everything is very different here. And I mean, literally down to the language, like they speak in this town, Musgo, which is an indigenous language of Mexico, and Spanish, but most of my partner's conversations with this family are in Musgo, and I just like happily like understand the 10 words I can understand. So, there's just a lot new. And so there's been a lot of challenges, but I will say like, there's just been a lot of kind of paring my life down to kind of like the absolute core, I guess. And in some way that's brought me a lot of joy, I guess. Like my ability, this kind of sudden feeling that I've like really discovered or like stripped away all the rest of that stuff. I'm sure I haven't stripped it all away, you know what I mean? But I feel like I stripped away so much of like these trappings of things that were important to me, but have stopped being important to me because there's just so much else to do and other things happening. And I'm, I feel like it's doing interesting things to my writing that I'm not sure like what that's going to turn into. Like I'm still very much on this kind of like nascent egg stage, but yeah, like I don't know. I mean, I know that's a really kind of nebulous answer. Like, what's bringing me joy? Like having like uprooted myself and stripped away all my material possessions, but something like that. And like there's just so many things that I'm learning that I different ways of looking at the world that I just hadn't realized that I could change. Yeah, so that's what I've been doing. I've been just trying to like find myself and like right now, because we all change. So like, who am I right now? And I think that's been good.
Where am I finding joy? I'm finding joy in a place that I never imagined in a million years I would ever find joy. It doesn't make any sense to me. I spent like the last year alternating between anxiety, depression, and nap. Like the entire year. Like it was terrible. And then January rolled around and I was just kind of not really feeling very good about anything. And I kind of took a look around my apartment, which is very small. It's 341 square feet. It is essentially one room plus the bathroom. And I had a look around and I was like, this place is depressing. It's really depressing. I don't like it. I don't like living here. But I can't move. It's January. Like let's not be crazy. And so I was like, well, how could I like it? Like what could I do to like my space? And the answer is like, I got to get rid of some of this crap. And so I started decluttering my entire apartment, like the whole thing. I would like get up and I would pick a tiny area and I would sort through every single item in that tiny area. And if I didn't want that thing, I threw it away. Basically because I had held on to so much stuff because I felt like it had value, and that somebody else could use it and it was still good even if it didn't serve me anymore. And I just realized at this point in the middle of January that I wasn't reorganizing my life because I was dedicated to making sure that I did not hurt the feelings of inanimate objects I didn't want anymore. I wanted to secure their happy futures. And I couldn't do that because we're in the middle of a perturbation. Like the charity stores aren't open. The donation box that is usually outside my apartment has been locked shut for months. And even the kind of the informal kind of leave stuff you don't need, pick up stuff that you want thing that we had going on in the lobby, they put signs up telling us that we couldn't do it. So the only choice I had was to throw stuff away. And it was very hard, but then I did. And then I was addicted to it. and it's like, everything has been getting better as I've been getting rid of stuff that I don't need. And that's weird, but that's the truth.
I love the idea of like throwing things away as like self-care. Might try to do that. The next question is, do you have any advice for up and coming Black writers in the speculative fiction field?
I do. Write whatever the heck you want. Don't let anybody tell you that you have to write your stories a certain way, that you have to include certain things, that you have to address certain issues. You do not. You don't. You get to write science fiction and fantasy stories about Black people having a good time, and that's the end.
Yeah, yeah, write what you want. Like there's always kind of weird things, like thorny things, like people getting in your way. I mean, I don't know how else to describe this, obviously, but just, like that weird thing where you're like, did that happen because I'm a bad writer or because, all of this other bullshit? That is discouraging, but, try to find why, remember why you're writing, I think that makes it worthwhile because there are not enough, but there's ways to publication and there's ways to and people who want to read those stories. So believe in your work because you're going to need it to be able to persevere past all of those big thorny spiky things that make it kind of hard.
Okay. We're just going to ask the audience if there are any more questions as well. You can either put them in the chat or in the Q&A, or Gavin, if you have any questions as well. I think I had all these questions for both of you, especially about what it is like to, and is it something that I've experienced as well, and Yvette may experience too, of living outside of the United States and publishing in the United States. But I feel like both of you have started to sort of think about that a little bit. But if it's something that you could talk to, what it is to be on the other side of the United States geographic line, and to have most or a big chunk of your audience be within that geographic boundary.
I didn't think about it too hard. I think probably because I was born and raised in the American science fiction and fantasy tradition, there wasn't really anything else. I mean, yes, I read British science fiction. Yes, I read science fiction and translation. But like the core of it is like the core of it is capitalism and apple pie, and a fish does not notice water. So I never really thought about it.
Yeah, I immigrated to Mexico like 7 years ago. So I have this kind of very bifurcated experience now where I published, I guess, the majority of my novels, I was still living in the States. And then when I moved to Mexico, my YA novel, Love is a Drug, came out. So that was kind of like my first publication. Like, wow, I was not living in the States, but of course I'd written it there. So, and I like kind of went on like a mini pre-pub tour there, so I was very much kind of going back and forth. So it was a different experience, certainly. But maybe not so different. Now, I've been here for a while. I haven't published for a while either. And so now I have two books coming out within like 6 months of one another. And then that has been a very different experience, especially because of the pandemic. It was like totally different. And it is kind of strange. I mean, it's an interesting thing to like have written books where the people in my immediate vicinity, I mean, we're not gonna, I mean, in general, it's not like I'm some big name writer, everyone's gonna be reading my book on the subway, but like there was always a kind of possibility that if someone saw me with my book, they'd like, oh, what is your book? But like that's not happening, I mean, it's like this, I mean, it's not that, it's like a totally bizarre object, but like the idea of reading fiction out here is just not that common. I mean, in the cities, yes, but out here in this town, it's just not very common. So like what I do seems kind of like this other thing that is just out on the side, and like the rest of my life here just has like very little context with it, or connection to it. So, and I don't know. I mean, I also, like my partner doesn't speak or read English, right? So like he's not reading my work unless I translate it for him. So a lot of things that I had kind of just, I think it's what Chelsea was saying about the kind of like just like live in the water and you don't notice it until you're not. And I mean, like that capitalist American water is really strong. And that having not been in it for like 7 years, I've kind of like I'm in a strange place where I'm kind of still writing to that market, but I'm not there anymore. And so I'm not really sure again, like what that's doing to my writing exactly. But I notice it a lot when I try to, or I try to like explain what I do, or I try to like share these stories with people who have very different histories than I do. I think that's good. I think it's good and like humbling to like remember that you're not actually like at the center of the creative universe. Something that Americans all too often forget.
I was just in the middle of a literary big deal in my country. The Canada Reads competition. It's kind of like the Tragically Hip. It's huge here. Nobody else has heard of them. And I find that I really was uncomfortable with how visible I became as a result of Canada Reads. I am really, really hoping that I can kind of go back to like everybody just assuming that I'm just another person on the street, because wow, I didn't like that.
That makes a lot of sense. And I'm also feeling from the excerpts that you read that there's a lot of, and from the work that you write, that it's all about pointing out that the water is capitalism, right? In the work that you're doing. I think that the theme that I felt that was coming across in both of your works was the sense of rebellion, but then also of community. I think both of you spoke to that in the excerpts that you read. And that seemed like something that was really important in the work that you were doing about kind of the community working together, the collective, who your friends are. I don't know if that's something that you're thinking about consciously in the work that you're doing, or whether it's just something that's coming out because of 20th, 21st century and all the history that came before.
I definitely feel and have felt, but now maybe more consciously, that I want to write against a certain strain of like hyper individualism that is certainly very, very strong in American science fiction and fantasy. The idea of like the exceptional one that goes against the community, or like that their greatness comes from leaving. I enjoy solitary characters often, but what I don't like is this complete distancing from where you came from, or from where you're going. Even if you're an immigrant, like I'm part of a community, I wasn't born into this community. So that is, I don't know. So that's something that I guess it's a constant conversation with myself, right? So like that's kind of infuses my work in all sorts of different ways, because I just don't like it. I feel like I in my early work maybe kind of fell into it a little bit, even though I think even then I was questioning it, but it's just like it was just so much a part of like the kinds of stories that we always hear about. And so as I I've kind of matured as a writer, I've really tried to bring that back in, like who are your elders and your children and your friends and like that community, and how does that interact with the world that you're living in, no matter how much of an individual or a rebel or whatever, how much of an outsider you feel. I mean, like even like most very few outsiders are really and truly separated from all communities, and that's really not the kind of story that people are telling when they're telling these hyper individual stories or telling these kind of fables of individualism that don't really make that much sense if you dig down into it.
Yeah, I feel all of that. It made me think about kind of the progression of sorts that happened in Soulstar. I mean, Miles is this very isolated character who was hiding from everything. He was even hiding his identity, kind of things. He was alone, and his development was in finding a couple of people to be part of. And then I jump to a character who has a lot of political power. And her community is basically like, be bold, proud, and resolute, and now and then stab as occasion serves. Everybody's got a knife, everybody's got an agenda. And so she doesn't have she doesn't have a community. She has rivals. And at the end of it, she decides that she wants to choose something else. And the third book is about a woman who lives in a big house with like 60 of her relatives at all times, 24 hours a day, 4 generations in the family, huge meals at dinner. All the work done is communal. She's a community organizer. She basically does a lot of work within her group. She believes that she is part of something bigger. And I loved writing Soulstar for that. I loved writing somebody who was like deep inside her community, was a part of it, and felt like she needed to tend it. She needed to grow it and make sure that it was healthy and stuff like that. I love that experience. I definitely want to do it again. And I definitely want to see more of that.
Okay, our next question. A lot of writers have very interesting, sometimes bizarre writing rituals or writing quirks. Are there any rituals that you keep returning to?
Aside from writing everything in order, not really. What? No, I'm so bad at that. Like, I honestly, like, I swear to you, like, if my one writing ritual is like, I say this time I'm going to have a schedule, you know. I mean, I just don't, like, I just don't. Every time I'm like, no. Now I'm going to have, and then, you know, I kind of had a little ritual, which was I would write in coffee shops, and the pandemic happened, and so then everything had to get, you know, shuffled around. So I don't know. Really, honestly, I write when I can, like, find time to write. And then I, like, you know, the other day I grabbed my computer and I like went and I sat, I dragged the goats behind me, and I just sat with my computer editing my novel while the goats were eating. Like, I just do it whenever I can find time. So it's just, there's no schedule at all. I don't have any rituals. I just try to like put words on a page.
I have do I have rituals? Okay, so I have a routine that I do first thing in the morning and get out of bed, and I'm on pretty much a full internet ban for hours in the morning. As soon as I get out of bed, I don't pick up my phone, I don't look at my iPad, I don't check my email, I don't do any of that. None of that. I get up and I do chores immediately. I get up and it's like I wash the dishes from last night while I make coffee. I run the garbage out. If there's garbage to run out, if there's a load of laundry that needs to get started, I start the load of laundry. And just to kind of get those hand tasks happening. And then I sit down on my computer, and only certain things can get through the internet firewall while I take my language lesson, do some free writing on a site called For the Words, where I defeat a monster every day with words. And then I spend 30 minutes working on the world building for the story that I'm writing, just whatever it is that I'm looking up or whatever. And then I gradually let the internet back. I will look at my email. I will, oh, for the words, hang on a second. I will look at my email. I will chat with my fellow writers. And then I will just kind of gradually open the information fire hose until like I have the full force of all of the information that I could ever need and more. And now I am a distracted little squirrel. But first thing in the morning, I guard that fiercely.
I love your routine. It is like my most aspirational routine. I have like, again, one day I will have a routine that is something more than one day I'm going to have one, but like, that sounds great.
Yeah, I agree that that's aspirational to me as well. I don't even know how to wake up in the morning and not check my mail straight away. Well, I think that we're coming sort of to the end of our evening and of everyone's bandwidth here. I just wanted to thank you both, and Gavin and our audience, so much for being here and for answering all of our questions, even the hard ones, and for your amazing readings. Oh, yeah. So, Catherine, thank you for reminding me. The next event is on April 13th with Isabel Yap and Rebecca Roanhorse. So very excited about that. Isabel's just had a short story collection come out with Small Beer as well. And Rebecca Roanhorse has got her latest novel out as well. Yeah, thank you, Gavin, too. Yes, and Catherine, if you can, I will make a note of your email. I think that you had to include it when you registered. Yep, those are the books Gavin is advertising. And yeah, we'll see you in about a month. And thanks again, both of you. It was lovely.
Thanks, everybody. This was great.
Thank you, Alaya. Thank you, Chelsea.
Thank you for inviting me. I had a good time.
I'm glad.
Really enjoyed your conversation, back and forwards.
All right.
I'm talking to writers. So, well, all right, guys.
Bye.
Good night.
Bye.